You say, I understand. By the way, are you familiar with the work of Saul Griffin and his Jocelyn machine? You say an atheist presented this work to you. That you... Well, and you asked me if I'm interested in exploring that. You say that this atheist who sent me his work was extremely excited about it, going so far as to see it personally in action. Well, you know, I tried looking up any work by Saul Griffin and the Shaky Machine. I can't say I found anything with regards to abiogenesis. If you had any links, articles, I'd say I'd be glad to read them. I questioned this atheist further and said, he said Dr. Griffin was an engineer who could construct a building just by jostling it up. I asked him what kind of building, and he never responded. He did say that it had nothing to do with abiogenesis when I asked him why he sent me to the website, and I responded with, well, why bring it up? Still, though, he sent it when we were talking about abiogenesis, and he was so thrilled about it, I took his reasons as proof, as excitement, as proof that something can come about through jostling, even though he contradicted himself and said it had nothing to do with it, with abiogenesis. You say, oh, I'm pretty sure they can, like ice crystals forming harm. You think that's pretty spectacular of how something so as complex as ice crystals can form, don't you? I mean, I haven't met an atheist who wasn't dumbstruck, it seems. They always bring up ice crystal formation, eventually, in their attempt to explain how life can arise through jostling. With that, I say, the point is to illustrate that chemical interaction alone produces a number of other complex molecules and structures. It is only when they are capable of self-replication that natural selection can begin affecting it. How does self-replication of something create life? When the degree drops to 32, isn't a form of self-replication created? The crystals are using the water to self-replicate, true? Yet you don't see real living frosties. I've got a question for you. You take certain elements, you add a spark to it, and keep on and keep that going. Eventually, it makes more complex molecules, true? It makes the, quote, building blocks of life, true? How many years can these complex molecules lay on the bottom of the sea before they degenerate? If it's by event, it's tossed up into the upper part of the sea, and it falls down until a current carries it into the vent again, true? You feel, as an atheist, that it has to wait for a current to push it into the hot vent again, true? And believe that when it's jostled up again, it will be more complex, right? And after a few million years of a current pushing it into the vent, it will eventually be so complex that it'll start having information on it of how to make something as complex as a cell, true? But why should it be becoming more complex instead of just making a long strand of DNA that tells it to be an ignorant piece of rock? Why should such jumbling and jostling make it want to start forming something on par with a complex cell? To say natural selection kicks in is to say it's natural that nature wants to make something complex, to make a selection, flying counter to the notion that if something is jostled about, it usually ruins it. You say, yeah, if human life arose through non-determined evolutionary processes, it seems that it would support the atheistic point of view for sure. To believe in God, you'd have to believe God had an incredible amount of patience and possibly throw Genesis out the window for sure. And with that, I say, more specifically, the God of the Abrahamic religions. So you are open to other gods, right? Now, there are a number of other definitions of God that would still be permitted and not considered in conflict. Gods with incredible patience, I see. You say, it's naturalistic to believe that if you jostle about atoms long enough, they will not only form complex molecules, but the strands of RNA, DNA will then form a complex cell. I hated to... And you say you hated to throw water on the atheist who's so excited about the Griffin shake-up that you call jostling machine. But even if he had to admit that no matter how big the jostling, you said that you mean jaking could be made, no matter how long the jostling would continue, a simple cell would not be on the table. That human intervention would have to intervene, totally destroying the whole point that something as complex as a, quote, simple cell, unquote, could be designed without intelligence. With that, I say that the scale on which these interactions occurred on Earth is vastly greater in both size and time than we could simulate in a laboratory. So, discard God, add time and size, true? Instead of one guy shaking a can of Legos and pouring them out to see if a Lego toy robot with bells and whistles being attached in the right places for 1 million years, have about 3 billion people shaking cans of Legos and pouring them out, and one will have all Legos put together, forming a Lego toy robot? You believe that, don't you? And a toy Lego robot is far less complex than a primitive cell, so I'm cutting you some slack by asking you this question. You do realize that, don't you? Yet there are many who seem to believe we expect a cell to simply, quote, form, unquote, or pop into existence if you mix some chemicals about for a while. Yeah, there do seem to be a lot of atheists believing that. I've seen. They call them complex until you question them. Then they say they aren't complex. But with C events and a lot of time, will become something that can't be created in a lab. In other words, it takes accidents, not intelligence, to create something complex. And it has nothing to do with jostling random information. Just laying on the floors of ancient seas and not degenerating after a few million years from accidentally being created by a lightning bolt, but waiting to be tossed into a sea vent by an ocean current? If you lower the temperature of water, it does not randomly turn to ice. It does so on the basis of very specific physical laws. But will that ice form life if the crystals formed aren't transient? Take the membrane of cells, the phospholipids, bilayers, do not form a membrane randomly. They do so as a result of their chemical properties. And where did the chemical properties come from? If you talk to atheists, they say these phospholipid bilators are quote, simple, unquote, like bubbles, but believe that the bubbles will become complex if DNA, RNA can get inside them and tumble about in vents. You don't call that faith, I bet, true?